Hey everyone. Hey Facebook. It's James. It's getting on towards 11 o'clock here. Finally managed to get online to start this live stream. So I'm sorry for being so late, but I had to get it out tonight or else it might not make it this weekend. And I think given current events, it's something that has to be done now. Okay, so sword, pestilence, and famine. Sword, famine, and pestilence, whatever the order is. Why am I talking about this tonight? Um, as you know from following the news has been wacky lately. I don't even need to get into all the toilet paper and coronavirus and all the nonsense, right? It's just crazy out there. And what I'm going to present tonight is a study, kind of an information teaching, whatever you want to call it, that uh, I've had on the back burner for a while, and I just it's got to come out tonight. It's relevant, and I think that what I'm going to talk about tonight, I think that there are a lot of misunderstandings about this, and I think that people are allowing those misunderstandings to feed into their understanding of what's going on with coronavirus and all the assorted things that go along with it. So anyway, bear with me through this. It's going to be, as you know, when I start talking Bible prophecy, it's usually pretty far off the beaten path. It's nowhere close to the mainstream typically. So if that's your cup of tea, then stay tuned, hang with me. If you're not really interested in kind of thinking outside the box this way, then maybe this stream isn't for you. So anyway, all right. So let's get started. Let's get into it. Okay. Why am I talking about sword, famine, and pestilence? For the past few days, I have been seeing a lot of chatter online. People are looking at this whole coronavirus thing. They're looking at whole countries shutting down, mass quarantines, school closures, toilet paper outages, the whole bit. And they're making the connection that this is like a plague. This is a pestilence. And with so many believing that we are in the last days, the logical conclusion is to look to our Bibles and to see, well, is this a fulfillment of some kind of end times prophecy? And many people are coming to the conclusion that what we're looking at with this coronavirus is one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. The four horsemen in Revelation. The seven seals. You start off with the first four, and they are depicted symbolically as riders on different types of horses. Okay, so that last horse, the fourth one, the pale horse, is pestilence. It's death. You know, and so a lot of people are out there starting to wonder and starting to question: Are we seeing that horseman riding right now? There are some people who are looking at the coronavirus, and they're looking at the name, and they're saying, well, corona means crown. Well, what do we see with the first horse of Revelation? We see a rider on a white horse, and a crown is given to him. So they're wondering if the white horse is riding right now. And even for people that aren't really thinking of it in terms of the seven seals, it's got a certain apocalyptic vibe to it for a lot of people. And I think that hitting the zeitgeist the way it um, is why you have so many people panicking, because people are kind of like, wow, this really could be it. We could actually be in the last days, and so that realization is hitting a lot of people right now, and we're seeing the mess and the chaos that we have. So I'm going to get into the seven seals. I'm just going to go there and start reading. Um, I'm going to connect some dots that might seem kind of odd to connect, but I'm a firm believer that whenever we read the Word of Yahweh, whenever we read the Bible, that instead of trying to interpret what it means through what we see around us in our times, like looking for coronavirus in the Bible, we need to allow the Bible to interpret itself. So if I see something in the book of Revelation, specific phrases, specific vocabulary words, things like that, I need to be looking backwards in the Bible, even if I have to go all the way back to Genesis, for matching phrases, matching context, things like that to help me interpret what I'm reading. So that's what I'm going to do tonight, and I think you'll find the interpretation is quite a bit different than what most of us, myself included, have historically believed. Uh, okay, so to get right to it, I'm going to start reading in Revelation chapter 6. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying, as with a loud voice of thunder, "Come!" I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come!" And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to him to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come!" I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, or a pale horse. And he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades, or Hell, was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. I'm going to stop right there, and I might get into the rest of the seals a little bit later here, but for now, I'm just going to focus on these first four. Okay. So, what is the historic interpretation of these four horsemen? Okay. In my studies on eschatology over the years, I've seen that the prevailing view, and there's broad spectrum of belief on this and interpretations, but it seems like the prevailing view, if you take either a historicist or a futurist interpretation of this, is that the white horse is the Antichrist coming to power. And once he does that, we have global war of some sort. Many interpret that as the Gog Magog war spoken about in Ezekiel. Then, after that war, you have global famine, and then you have global pestilence, which is the fourth horse. Okay, that's generally, I think, how people interpret these four horsemen, and that's how I used to. Okay, I don't anymore, and I'm going to go into why. First, let's take a look at the context of this. Let's break down and really look at what he's saying here, and let's think about this logically. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to go to back to chapter 5 in Revelation, and I'm going to read. I'll just start the beginning. I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a book, and it actually would have been a scroll, literally a scroll, written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals. Now, in the old days, when an official document was written, if it was from a court, from a monarchy, whatever the case may be, in order to ensure that it had not been opened by someone else that wasn't intended to read it or tampered with, whoever was in charge, the king, a notary, what judge, whatever, would put a wax seal on it to seal it closed. So if you received that document and that seal was broken, you knew somebody else had gotten into it before you did and read it. Okay? So we're looking at a scroll with 7 wax seals, literally, holding it closed. Okay? So I have a sheet of paper here, and I will try to do this as an example here. I don't have wax seals, but I have a rolled up sheet of paper here. Okay? Hopefully you can see this. This is a scroll. Now imagine up and down the length here, you have 7 wax seals holding the scroll closed where it can't be opened. Okay. Now before it was sealed up, we just read that it was written on both sides. Okay. So let's think about this logically. Whatever is written on this scroll is sealed up, and it is closed up in a way that it cannot be opened. Okay. So we're going to read here that everybody in the court here is dismayed that nobody can open this. So we've got all this information written front and back, but we can't read it because it's sealed up. Nobody can open the seals, okay? Who was able to open the seals? If a king sealed a document in the old days, The only person who could unseal it was someone who had authorization to unseal documents that were sealed by the king. So if you were that person, you knew it was you. You know, in modern business, we have the concept of need to know. In my job, we have certain confidentiality requirements. We have private health information, personal health information, personal identifying information, things like that. We have HIPAA laws. So I can see private information if it is relevant to my job function. If it's not, it's off limits to me. So that's kind of analogous to the wax seal in this document. Okay. So to continue, I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who was worthy to open the book and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or earth or under the earth was able to open the book or to look into it. Then I began to weep greatly because no one was found worthy to open the book or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, "Stop weeping. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome, so as to open the book and its seven seals." And I saw between the throne with the four living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having seven horns and seven eyes, which are the seven spirits of Elohim, sent out into all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand um, of him who sat on the throne. When he had taken the book, the four living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And then they go and they sing this new song. Okay, so later on, we have the Lamb actually breaking these seals. Okay, so logically, we cannot know what is written on this scroll until those seals are broken. Okay, and if we were to do this as an exercise, like a physical exercise, if I were to hand you a scroll with seven seals and you want to read what's in that scroll, you're going to open up all those seals pretty much at the same time, one right after the other. It might take you, a couple seconds if you've got a knife or whatever. However you're going to do it, it's not going to take you long, probably under a minute. You're not going to like take the first seal off and like come back tomorrow and open up the next one, and then maybe come back the next week and open up the third one. That kind of is not how it works. You want to read that document, so you're going to pop all those seals at the same time. Okay, I think that's what we're looking at here. So if we look at the physical model we've been given here, we've been given an example, a physical example of something that is going to happen like in the real world in a time sense. Okay, all of these seals are broken basically at the same time. And I know that people have tried to line these up with, there's different ways to look at it, because you have the seven seals, the seven trumpets, the seven bowls of wrath. Some people think that they all happen the same thing, the same time. So in other words, you really only have seven events, but you're describing each of those events three different ways. Some people think that they happen um, kind of like those Russian dolls. They're kind of stacked in each other. So like you go seven seals, the seventh seal is open. During that time, you have the seven trumpets. During the time of the seventh trumpet, the seven bowls are open. So you have this nesting kind of effect, I guess, with how they work time wise. Okay, but with these seals, I'm more and more of the opinion that these are going to happen pretty much at the same time. In other words, it could even be one event. It could be one event. And when this happens, when these seals are opened, then we can see what's on the scroll. Then we can read the front and back of the scroll, okay? And so I'm going to present that this is an event, not a drawn out series of events, okay? So now that we've kind of established where I'm going with that, let's take a look at this in more detail, okay? It's been a long day, and I'm tired, so bear with me here. Hopefully I'm not coming across as too frazzled here. Okay, so this first horse, he's a white horse. He has a bow. The rider on it has a bow, and he's given a crown. He goes out conquering and to conquer. Okay, so when we think of a conquering king, the typical archetype that we see, like think of King Arthur, right? He's got this awesome sword. He's got Excalibur or whatever. in all the movies, in all of the accounts, when you have a mighty king, going to battle, he brings a sword, right? But in this case, this king has a bow, and there's no mention that there's any arrows here. And that's always kind of nagged at me over the years. Like, why does he have a bow instead of a sword? And then where are the arrows? Like, and it could be something where, the writer of this thinks, we're smart enough to realize, hey, bows and arrows go together. I don't need to be redundant and say a bow and an arrow. My reader is smart enough to know that when I say bow, I also mean arrows. That's possible. But I also think that with the level of detail that's written into the book of Revelation, it makes sense that he would have put arrows in there just to follow with that level of detail. Hopefully that makes sense. It seems inconsistent to me to leave out a detail like that just haphazardly, you know. I think that there's a specific purpose why that there are no arrows here, okay? The next one is war. This is just generally, war. People are slaying each other with the sword, okay? Now, I think it's important when you look in the Greek, okay, and it talks about, it's granted for him to take peace from the earth. When we look at that word in the Greek that gets translated as earth, that word can be translated as like the whole planet. It can be translated as a region. It can be translated as like countryside, a piece of land. My 1 acre of paradise here is earth in that same Greek word. So it's a generic term basically for ground, and there's no geographic size limit built into the word itself. Okay. So historically, we have interpreted this as being a global scale, but it could be regional, it could even be localized. Okay, the word itself doesn't really tell us the scale of this. Okay, so keep that in mind. When we go to the famine, okay, the third seal, the black horse, okay, he's got a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. A denarius at that time, depending on what your wages were, it was roughly a day's worth of wages for a common working man. Okay, so basically, you're working a whole day, and all you're able to get out of that money that you made is like a quart of wheat, you know, which, when you're baking bread for a family of three or four or five or six, that's not going to last you very long. Okay, so this is like an inflation kind of thing, like what we see in Venezuela or like the Weimar Republic, that type of thing, right? And then do not damage the oil and the wine. Now, we have historically, I've used to believe this, and I've seen tons and tons of writing on the internet basically saying this is global famine. Okay, this is global famine, and basically do not damage the oil and the wine. Well, the wealthy, the ultra rich, they're going to have oil and wine kind of kept back for themselves, because they're privileged and they can do it. Okay, and I guess on the surface that sounds reasonable, to think that the wealthy would do something like that. Um, but I don't think that this is global, and I'm trying to kind of lead you along and kind of get this in your mind that I don't think this is global. I think that we're looking at something regional, and actually I think it's going to be more local than we've typically thought. When we get in that fourth seal, this is death basically. This is like pestilence, okay? And he says specifically that it's going to kill with the sword, with famine, pestilence, and the wild beasts of the earth. Okay, and this is the crux of what I'm going to say here. Okay, those three concepts: the famine, the sword, the pestilence. Okay, the reason I think that this is a localized event and not global is because when we look at those three words, like if you go into Blue Letter Bible and you do a word search, pop those three words in together, to where they come up together, and it'll show you where they appear in the same context. The vast majority of the time, when it talks about those three things happening in the same context, it is in the context of a siege of a city. Okay? So if you think about how a siege happens, okay, we've seen it in the movies, I'm sure. You have an army that surrounds a city. It's much easier. I mean, if you storm a city, you're going to lose a lot of manpower, right? A lot of troops. So what you end up doing is you surround the city, you seal it off. Okay, anybody that's surrounding that city, your soldiers will have to fight because they're in contact. Okay, you take those guys out first. You seal the city off. Now, once that city is sealed off, the people inside the city walls, all of a sudden, their resources are limited. They're limited to the food they have inside the walls, the water they have inside the walls. Once that runs out, they're done. Okay? So, what happens at that point? People will they'll run out of water first. Okay? People will die from thirst. You have people who will last longer, who will eat whatever food is there. Eventually, the food runs out. Now, this whole time, people are dying. They're stuck inside this city wall. They can't really go to the city wall and like throw the carcasses overboard because then the archers from the enemy who are surrounding the city can pick them off the top of the city walls. So you can't really do that. So you've got bodies of dead people all in your town. Okay? When you go to use the bathroom, you can't take your waste outside the city gates anymore and dump it. So you have a massive sanitation issue developing inside the city walls. You have starvation, dehydration. You have corpses that are sitting there basically in your streets and in your houses rotting depending on how long this thing takes. Now, what happens when you have bodies and you have fecal matter and urine and all this stuff just sitting there, right? You have diseases. You have sickness that starts to spread through the people. The people who have survived up to this point are going to get very sick very fast. You're going to have rodents and cockroaches come in, okay, to feast on the carcasses of the people who have died so far. I realize this is pretty grim and graphic, but this is the reality of a siege, okay? And so if you have any survivors, eventually the surrounding group of soldiers is going to see, okay, they have gotten so weak, we can just go ahead and storm the city and just finish this off. So eventually they will storm the city and they will kill or take captive whoever survived up to that point, and they will take the city. Now, this is how a siege works. So when we see these four horsemen, I think what we're seeing is a siege of a city, not a global sequence of events. Okay? I think that when, just like I mentioned earlier, if we want to read that scroll, we have to pop those seals off at the same time. Then we open the scroll up. We don't pop one seal and wait, and then pop another one and wait. We want to read the document. We want to get in that scroll and see what it says, right? So you pop the seals all at once. So I think that at least these first four, and very well maybe all seven of these seals, are going to be opened either simultaneously or very near each other time wise. Okay. To give you kind of biblical background, because like I said earlier, I'm a big believer in allowing the Bible to interpret itself. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the book of Jeremiah. We're going to read about the siege of Jerusalem under King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. We're going to go to Jeremiah 32. Um, there's a lot of information in here, but I'm just going to read a couple key verses that are going to show this pattern of sword, famine, and pestilence being all mentioned together in the context of a siege. Okay, so I'm going to read Jeremiah 32, starting in 24. I guess I'll read a couple verses. Behold, the siege ramps have reached the city to take it, and the city is given into the hand of the Chaldeans who fight against it, because of the sword, the famine, and the pestilence. And what you have spoken has come to pass, and behold, you see it. Okay? So, right there, we have those three concepts, the sword, the famine, the pestilence, all mentioned in conjunction with the siege of Jerusalem at the time of Jeremiah. Now, he talks about this is what you said would come to pass. That's got two meanings. Jeremiah has been saying for 20 some odd years at this point that this is going to happen. And now everybody's seeing it happen. Also, when we go back into the Torah and we look at like Leviticus chapter 26, we look at the blessings and the curses. These curses, these events, these pestilences, war, captivity, all these things are listed as specific curses among Yahweh's people for their rebellion against him. Okay? So these are judgments on his people. Now, the nucleus of power for his people in the southern kingdom of Judah at this point was Jerusalem. Okay, that's where the temple was, the priesthood, the monarchy, the whole bit was there. Okay, the majority of your population was centered in and around Jerusalem. You had farmers and stuff out in the fields, but it was a metropolitan area. That's where, just like here, that's where most of the people were gathered. Okay, um, so we'll read. Let's skim down to verse 36. That same chapter, chapter 32. Now, therefore, thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel concerning this city of which you say, it is given into the hand of the king of Babylon by sword, by famine, and pestilence. Okay, so there we go, the same three. Now, this is just two examples. If you do a word search, like I said earlier, pop these three terms in. You might have to get creative with your language, depending on your translation. You might have to look for plague instead of pestilence, or war instead of sword, different things like that. But the concepts are almost universally presented together in the context of the overthrow of a city, okay, like a siege. Because, like I said, I just laid out earlier logically how a siege progresses. This is what we're looking at, okay? I'm going to go to Ezekiel. Um, Ezekiel began to prophesy before the siege of Jerusalem, and he continued on after. I'm going to read. This is going to be lengthy. I'm going to read two whole chapters here, so bear with me. And I encourage you to grab your Bibles and read along with me, because this is something that and I'll get into this in a later video, but I think that we could be looking at Ezekiel chapter 4 uh, being a future fulfillment for our times. I know historically people have interpreted this as um, him prophesying the fall of Jerusalem that we just mentioned during Jeremiah's time with King Nebuchadnezzar. But I think that there's textual evidence in the book of Ezekiel that points to this happening in the future after that. So it would have to either be he would have to either be talking about the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD under Titus, or he would have to be talking about a future fall of Jerusalem, which is where I'm leaning these days. I know that sounds wacky, but I'll explain it in a later video, so hang tight on that one. Anyway, I'll read it for now. And just think of this concept of a siege that we're going to read about here. And think about what we just read with those four horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelation. And see in your mind if it looks similar to you. Okay? Um, Now, you son of man, get yourself a brick, place it before you, and inscribe a city on it, Jerusalem. Then lay siege against it, build a siege wall, raise up a ramp, pitch camps, and place battering rams against it all around. Then get yourself an iron plate and set it up as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face toward it so that it is under siege, and besiege it. This is a sign to the house of Israel. Turn my heater off real quick, sorry. As for you, lie down on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You shall bear their iniquity for the number of days that you lie on it. For I have assigned you a number of days corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days. Now, in the Septuagint, it says 190 days. And I think that's significant. I'll maybe discuss that later if I can remember to get back to it. Where was I? Thus you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. When you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. I have assigned it to you for 40 days, a day for each year. Then you shall set your face toward the siege of Jerusalem with your arm bared, and prophesy against it. Now behold, I will put ropes on you so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have completed the days of your siege. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment and note something here. If you are familiar with anything I've mentioned before in previous videos or just talking in person, you know that I'm what's called a two-houser. I believe that what the Bible says, that the house that Israel was split into two houses. It says it plainly all through the Bible. You had the northern kingdom of 10 tribes, which was centered around Samaria. Um, they were taken captive by the Assyrians. They were dispersed throughout the known land. The southern kingdom of Judah, centered around Jerusalem, the Jews basically, and Benjamin and some other mixed tribes there, Levites and such, were taken captive by Babylon. They were allowed to come back into the land, even though most of them chose not to. They were comfortable where they were at in Babylon. Okay, so you have two houses of Israel here. And he's talking about iniquity being assigned for each one of those houses. Okay, so this is a sign for the house of Israel. If you look at it the way it's worded, even though he's laying on his side for Judah, he doesn't say it's a sign for the house of Judah. He specifically says this is a sign for the house of Israel. Okay, now that's significant, I think, and I'll hopefully flesh that out here in a minute because I think it's going to pop up here again and it's relevant. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there to kind of get that in your mind what we're looking at here. Okay. Um, But as for you, take wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Put them in one vessel, and make them into bread for yourself. You shall eat it according to the number of days that you lie on your side, 390 days. Your food which you eat shall be 20 shekels a day by weight. You shall eat it from time to time. The water you drink shall be the sixth part of a hin by measure. You shall drink it from time to time. You shall eat it as a barley cake, having baked it in their sight over human dung. Okay? Then Yahweh said, Thus will the sons of Israel eat their bread unclean among the nations where I will banish them. But I said, Ah, Yahweh Elohim, behold, I have never been defiled. For from my youth until now I have never eaten what died of itself, or was torn by beasts, nor has any unclean meat ever entered my mouth. I wish I could say the same. Then he said to me, See, I will give you cow's dung in place of human dung, over which you will prepare your bread. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, behold, I am going to break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, famine, and they will eat bread by weight and with anxiety, and drink water by measure and in horror, because bread and water will be scarce, and they will be appalled with one another and waste away in their iniquity. Sounds a lot like what I described earlier in how a typical siege functions, including the human dung. In this case, he didn't have him do it, but he told him to cook his bread over human dung. If you're in a siege situation and you've eaten all of the cows, you've eaten all the livestock that are in the city, and it's basically just a bunch of humans left, you don't have a lot to work with. So you're going to be cooking over human dung just from a survival standpoint. It's a very real possibility. I know it's gross, but that's what we're looking at here. Okay. Now, chapter 5. And listen to the language here because this ties in with the whole concept I've been trying to present here. As for you, son of man, take a sharp sword. Take and use it as a barber's razor on your head and your beard. Then take scales for weighing and divide the hair. 1/3 you shall burn in the fire at the center of the city, when the days of the siege are completed. Then you shall take 1/3 and strike it with the sword all around the city. And 1/3 you shall scatter to the wind, and I will unsheathe the sword behind them. Take also a few in number from them and bind them in the edges of your robes. Take again some of them and throw them into the fire and burn them in the fire. From it a fire will spread to all the house of Israel. Thus says Yahweh Elohim, This is Jerusalem. I have set her at the center of the nations, with lands about her. But she has rebelled against my ordinances more wickedly than the nations, and against my statutes more than the lands which surround her. For they have rejected my ordinances, and have not walked in my statutes. Therefore, thus says Yahweh Elohim, because you have more turmoil than the nations which surround you, and have not walked in my statutes, nor observed my ordinances, nor observed the ordinances of the nations which surround you. This sounds a lot like modern day Jerusalem to me. Therefore, thus says Yahweh Elohim, Behold, I, even I, am against you, and I will execute judgments among you in the sight of the nations. And because of all your abominations, I will do among you what I have not done, and the like of which I will never do again. See, that's why I think I pause for a moment and talk about that. He says he'll never do this again afterwards. If he's talking about the siege of Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar, well, guess what? It happened again under Titus. And the best we can tell, the siege under Titus was much worse than what Nebuchadnezzar did. So there's a timing component here that makes me think that this siege he's talking about is not the one under Nebuchadnezzar, just because it got worse after that. This doesn't make any sense if that was that siege based on this language. Therefore, fathers will eat their sons among you, and sons will eat their fathers. For I will execute judgments on you and scatter all your remnant to every wind. So as I live, declares Yahweh Elohim, surely because you have defiled my sanctuary with all your detestable idols and with all your abominations, therefore I will also withdraw, and my eye will have no pity, and I will not spare. 1/3 of you will die by plague, or be consumed by famine among you. 1/3 will fall by the sword around you, and 1/3 I will scatter to every wind, and I will unsheathe the sword behind them. Thus my anger will be spent, and I will satisfy my wrath on them, and I will be appeased. Then they will know that I, Yahweh, have spoken in my zeal, when I have sent my wrath upon them. Moreover, I will make you a desolation and a reproach among the nations which surround you, in the sight of all who pass by. So it will be a reproach, a reviling, a warning, and an object of horror to the nations who surround you when I execute judgments against you in anger, wrath, and raging rebukes. I, Yahweh, have spoken. When I send against them the deadly arrows of famine, which were for the destruction of those whom I will send to destroy you, then I will also intensify the famine upon you and break the staff of bread. Moreover, I will send on you famine and wild beasts, and they will bereave you of children. Plague and bloodshed also will pass through you, and I will bring the sword on you. I, Yahweh, have spoken. So I hope you can see the similarities there between the types of things we're dealing with this siege of Jerusalem compared to what we read about with those four horsemen in Revelation. It's the same exact concepts. Okay? So that's why I think that we're looking at something different than a global, a global scale when we look at those things. I think we're looking, when we combine them all together, Yahweh is telling us that the way we will know that that scroll has been opened, in other words, the way we will know that those seals have been broken, is when we see this last day's siege of Jerusalem. Okay? That's radical, I know. You may not have heard anybody say that before, but I'm convinced at this point that that's what we're looking at. And I think, I've mentioned before ad nauseum that, if you're the devil and you're in the business of deceiving, you don't throw something out there that's obvious and then do the obvious thing. You're not going to fool anybody. Okay? So if everyone is looking for this global stuff, then it makes sense that, and I realize that he's not the one ultimately doing everything here. I get that Yahweh is ultimately in control. He's the one that's actually doing this stuff. But if you want to deceive people so that they don't really understand what's going on, they're not prepared, they can't handle it, whatever you're trying to do, it makes sense to kind of muddy that understanding. Okay, so if everybody is looking for this global stuff to signify when we have entered the end times, and it doesn't happen globally, but we do have this siege of Jerusalem, well, people aren't going to be looking. They're not going to compute. Hey, we actually are in the days of Revelation. It's just not going to compute. And then there's your deception. So I'm going to get back into Revelation, and I want to get back into just some logical type questions here. Okay. Um, and I'm gonna tie this in with current events. Okay. Like I mentioned earlier, you got so many people who are looking at any plague, any pestilence that comes along. If it becomes a global pandemic like this coronavirus, this COVID-19, they plug it in as a possibility for one of these end times plagues. Okay. So, yes, we know that all this crazy bad stuff is going to happen before the return of our Savior. But he mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, okay, and I won't get into it in detail because this thing's going to be too long as it is, and I'm dependent on the battery life of my phone to get this through. So I'll try to keep this relatively short. But when you look at the account in Matthew, Mark, and Luke together, he is talking about the abomination of desolation. The abomination that causes desolation is an event that apparently takes place in Jerusalem that causes the nations to surround Jerusalem. In Luke, he says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then get out of town. Go to the mountains. If you're on your house, don't go in and get your stuff. I mean, he can't be clear enough. You don't have time. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, scoot. It's go time, okay? So the abomination that causes desolation is connected, and I really am beginning to think that these seven seals, or at least the first four, are describing the fallout from that abomination. They're describing the desolation that accompanies that abomination, if that makes sense. Okay, so there's a trigger event, and then we see those seals start to open, the siege of Jerusalem in response to that trigger event, whatever it may be. Now, I want to talk about something that's coming up. I'm going to throw this out there as a possibility. On YouTube, I have a video, The Abomination of Desolation, where I put out some different hypotheses and scenarios about what that might be, possible understandings. Um, I'm always on the lookout for this trigger event, and every time a possible trigger event passes and nothing happens, I breathe a big sigh of relief, okay? But we have another one potentially coming up this year, okay? Now, with this COVID-19 shutting down everything, okay? Over in Israel, you have got Israel had called for the WAF, the Jordanian WAF, the group that controls the Temple Mount, which is actually Fort Antonia. The temple never stood there. But anyway, the ones that control access to that, the Dome of the Rock, the Al Aqsa Mosque, anything on top of there, to basically forbid worshipers from coming up to stop the spread of coronavirus. And of course, we've seen probably the viral video on YouTube of Islamic folks over in Iran licking shrines, knowing full well that this stuff is going around. And so Israel is kind of borderline on lockdown over this now. And you have prominent rabbis who both the Ashkenazi chief rabbi and the Sephardic chief rabbi have come out and told the Jews, "Hey, stay away from the Western Wall from right now. Just don't go to the Kotel. Stay. Don't go there." They're discouraging meetings of large groups. Some of the synagogues are not having meetings anymore. And here in America, you have churches who are not meeting in person right now. They're just doing strictly online. Okay, so you have a potential for access to Fort Antonia, the Temple Mount, to be completely shut down. Okay, nobody allowed on top. Now, whether that happens or not, we'll see. But let's follow the logic here and let's go with the assumption that it eventually happens. Eventually, this thing gets to the point to where they say, look, no large groups, which means you can't come to the Temple Mount. No Jews at the Western Wall, nobody on top. Okay? Now, with us coming up on Passover is going to be about April the 9th, I think is the date, okay? The Sanhedrin has, the past few years, they have been putting in for permits with the Jerusalem government to do mock sacrifices, to do basically practice dry run Passover sacrifices away from the Temple Mount, away from Fort Antonia. Um, and they've been granted, so they'll kill a lamb, the priests will eat it and they call it good and they do their thing. This time, they put in a petition along with that to actually do it up on top of the mount. Okay? Now, for them to do this, they have got their makeshift temporary altar ready to go, which this altar, when you look at how Yahweh described his altars to be built, this altar does not follow the pattern. This altar is not kosher. It's not. I think this altar is bad news. It's if it's strange fire. Okay, so I'm wondering if they do shut down the Temple Mount, with the Temple Institute, the Temple Mount faithful, the Sanhedrin having all this stuff apparently ready to go. The Temple Institute, a day or two ago, posted a picture of two red heifers that they've got apparently ready to go. Now, having the red heifers scripturally is not necessary in order to build a temple or to offer sacrifices on the Temple Mount, the real Temple Mount. It's just not. But in their theology, it is a requirement. Okay? So they're signaling to the world that they've got everything ready to go. They just need the trigger to do it. Okay? So if I'm them and I'm just waiting for my opportunity, and all of a sudden there's nobody there, there's nobody home on the Temple Mount, it makes perfect sense that that's the time that you do it. So if this thing ends up extending into next month, into April, I think it's possible that we could see at least an attempt at that. Okay. So if that were to happen, the nations around Jerusalem are not going to be happy. I mean, they're just not. And we could very easily see Jerusalem under siege. We could very easily see it. I mentioned when we read in Ezekiel, he talks about setting up the iron plate. Okay. Now, Israel has what they call the Iron Dome, this automated weapons system that is supposed to intercept incoming missiles and rockets. Okay. Well, I remember, and I went looking a while back, and I couldn't find the actual video, but I distinctly remember at one point Netanyahu was doing a speech several years ago. It might have been during the Lebanon War, when Hezbollah was rocketing on from the north. I don't remember specifically, but he was talking about it, and instead of saying Iron Dome, he actually said Iron Plate. He actually said it. And the moment he said it, I instantly thought, wow, he said verbatim what Ezekiel's talking about. This iron plate. And it was just uncanny to me. So like I I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I am putting this out there as a possibility because I think that if we really are in the last days before our Savior's return, we need to be watchmen, and a watchman on the wall, if he's focusing in on a single threat that he's anticipating, you know um, it's like if you it's Princess Bride. Okay, when they storm the castle at the end, right? These watchmen are used to seeing, soldiers coming up to their gates. They're used to seeing cavalry. They're used to seeing archers. They're used to seeing um, siege works. They're used to seeing all this kind of stuff. But when they see the dread pirate Roberts show up at their gate with flaming fire and the deep voice, and just they panicked, they freaked out. It was such a surprise to them because that's not the kind of threat that they had ever been looking for. And so I think that we owe it to ourselves as watchmen and to the people who we're watching for, the people that we are serving, hopefully, to be on the lookout for any threat coming in. And so I think that this is a possibility. And so I'm throwing this out there. If we do see Jerusalem actually come under siege, and it's a prolonged siege, I think we could very well at that point say those seals are being opened. Um, that's maybe a bold statement. I'm not going to say it 100%. Like sure, I'm just saying I think it's highly likely that we can process the information that way. And that just reminded me. There's another time qualifier I wanted to get into here. I mentioned earlier that if Ezekiel's siege that we just read about is actually a future siege, it would have to either be the one in 70, future relative to his time, or one that's coming in our time, or maybe our descendants, or whenever it happens. Okay, future from us. Um, he talks about it being 390 days. Okay, in the Septuagint it says 190 days. That's a pretty big difference. 200 days is a lot of time for a siege. Um, So whichever one of those it ends up being, I think it's going to be probably the shorter amount. The shorter amount makes sense. And the reason I say that is because when we look at that third seal, okay, they still have wheat and barley to buy from each other and to ration. It hasn't run out yet at that point. It just takes a day worth of pay to buy it, but it's still available. The wine and the oil haven't been touched. So in a siege situation, like it does like right now, you know, people are panic buying. They're thinking about like what are my needs? They're going out and getting toilet paper. They're going and buying spam. They're going and buying, top ramen, like all this kind of stuff. They're not heading to the liquor store and buying up all the wine. They're not going down, the oil section of the grocery store and buying up all the olive oil. That's not even on their radar right now, you know? And so it to me, this is a time, like at this point, this is a relatively short siege, at least by the time we get to um, the third, the third seal. So I don't know that we're looking at 390 days long. That's over a year. I think they would be out of food by that point. Like I just don't see it lasting that long. I think the 190 days is probably more likely. Um, to get to the other seals, um, if these seals are all part of the siege, if they're all connected to this potential end time siege of Jerusalem, let's take a look at that fifth seal. Okay. When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of Yahweh, and because of the testimony which they had maintained. They cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Yahweh, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Now, I mentioned earlier that at the end of the siege, the surrounding army eventually breaks through and they kill everybody that's left or they take them captive. Now, it could be possible that these martyrs here are the surviving remnant of that siege, and at this point they're just exterminated. Maybe. I don't know. Um, it says specifically that they're killed because of the word of Yahweh and because of their testimony. It doesn't say that they're killed just because they were the last people in there. Okay. So is there a connection to the siege with this? Maybe. I don't know 100% for sure. That's why I'm saying I think at least the first four are tied in with the siege. The remaining seals, maybe. I don't know for sure. Um, the sixth seal, I looked, and when he broke the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair. The whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. And a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So, uh, if this is all connected to this siege, maybe this is how the siege ends. I mean, if you have all this crazy uh, seismic movement, mountains moving out of places, I would think that any remaining city walls would collapse, kind of like Jericho. Timing wise, maybe, I don't know. Just throwing that out there. I don't know if it's related or not. I do get really sick of people looking, and I'm sorry if this is close to home for you, but this blood moon nonsense with Mark Biltz and John Hagee and whoever, like, it, clearly the context of the moon becoming blood, the moon turning red, is in the context of this sixth seal. And then when you look at it in Joel, it talks about that happening after the days. So to say that we're looking for, these blood moon, full moons, prior to the day of the Lord, the day of Yahweh, as fulfilling these prophecies is backwards. Okay? It's nonsense. It just really is. And every single one of those dates came and went, nothing happened. Nothing. And we're still buying their books. We're still going to their seminars. We're still having them on TBN or whatever. Like I can't stand it. I can't stand it. So venting a little bit there. Sorry. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Like yes, we have plagues going around. Yes, we have pestilences and stuff. But I really think that when we try to force that into the book of Revelation, specifically things like the fourth seal, um, I really think we're just reaching on that. And I think that that's part of the reason why people are panicking because they're putting an apocalyptic spin on it. They're putting an end of the world kind of thing on it. And we've been conditioned that way. How many dystopian, end of the world movies have there been out over the past several years? Like where everything's broken down, society's collapsed, governments are gone, and everybody's, just out there in the wild fending for themselves, or they're under some oppressive, remnant government or whatever. I mean, so like, and that stuff always gets started with some kind of a plague. Not always, but it often does. Like I Am Legend or, whatever. There's some kind of a disease that goes around that destroys civilization as we know it. And so we're indoctrinated through the media to where now when we have global pandemics, it's oh no, this could be it. This could really be the end. Let's go buy toilet paper. you know, I just I'm just trying to present a reasonable alternative to that um, over the top kind of way of thinking about the end. I think that when this stuff really goes down, it's going to be a lot different than what we've all expected. It's probably not going to have the global scale that we expect. I just don't know that it will. I mean, and for me, it's been kind of one of these things in the back of my mind when we read about a fourth of all living will die. We're almost 8 billion people now. Like a quarter of that, that's roughly 2 billion people dead. That's crazy when you think about it. But if it is more regional than global, we're talking about a lot lower body count here. And if people are looking for this big epic global end of the world event and instead they get a siege of Jerusalem, we're going to be missing out. We're not going to be cognizant of the fact that we are in the last days when we actually are, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure how much battery I have left. It can't be much, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here. Um, if I go back over this and I see that I missed something, I may end up doing like a part two to kind of continue. But for now, I'm going to call it quits on that. If you have any questions, let me know, comment, private message me, talk to me in person if you know me. Um, I'll discuss it with you. Like I said, I know it's kind of radical. It's way off the trail. But I do think it is something to consider. And hopefully, I'm hoping it doesn't happen this year. I'm hoping we get through this and everything's back to normal and everything's great. But we have to, kind of the whole pray for the worst and hope, or um, hope, what's the saying? Hope for the best, pray for the worst and hope for the best, or however the saying goes. I think I just butchered that somehow. I feel like George Bush back in the day when he was trying to quote proverbs and sayings and stuff and would always get them backwards. It's late. I'm tired. Forgive me. Anyway, good night, everybody. Yeah, I hope you guys get off to a good start this week. I hope as your kiddos are home from school that you're able to find some way to make that work. Um, Homeschoolers kind of have a leg up on that because we're already home. But it's a big situation anyway. I mean, having to go to work hopefully, but then having to deal with your kids. And so for those of you that are facing that this week and the coming weeks ahead, um, I'm really with you in prayer because I know that's going to be hard, and I'm just hoping that we can hopefully help each other with this kind of stuff. The whole tribe concept to kind of get through it, and I'm hoping it does pass. Um, but you know, it is what it is. Hopefully, it's just a dry run, and we can maybe get stronger as a community through this. So, anyway, good night, everyone, and I will go to bed now. Good night.